All right, continuing on exploring the life of Eugene Rose, Father Seraphim Rose. I'm going to read from chapter 2. I'm going to skip a little bit and I'm going to give a kind of an overview. So, chapter 2 is entitled Seeds of Rebellion, and it has a quote from Fredrick Nietzsche on the right before it starts. And the quote is, "The errors of great men are more fruitful than the truths of little men." So Eugene went and started college in the autumn of 1952. He entered Pomona College in Southern California and moved into a dormitory room there. By this time, Eugene, 6'2", had grown into a tall, slim, well-formed man. He was of fair complexion with a strong jawline, a perfect set of white teeth, a long and rather unusually sculpted nose, a high forehead, and a thick brown hair which he combed straight back. The most prominent and intriguing aspect of his appearance was his large, thoughtful, penetrating blue eyes. He usually wore a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up. So in the 50s, there was a tradition in college of, the cool kids and activities that college kids would engage in, buying cars, cruising around, things of that nature, going to football games. Later on in the chapter, it reads here, to the 18-year-old Eugene, all of these activities, all these hankerings after popularity and success were matters of total indifference. If this was indeed real life, he was growing more and more disgusted with it. Although he continued to exhibit the same reserved dignity and thoughtful personality of his younger days, a passion was beginning to rise inside of him. Everything fell away before his first objective, to find out for himself why he existed in the first place. To know, to understand reality in the highest sense. And in the rest of the couple pages of the chapter, he talks about a very popular way to initially think through ideas of God as the universe in its totality. And a lot of this resonated with me because he talks about how he found Nietzsche and was blown away by him. I had a very similar encounter with Nietzsche when I first was getting into philosophy, and I find even in his younger years here, he had a penetrating wit in the way that he wrote and discussed things. So I'll read a little bit here from the chapter. So for answers to his ultimate questions, Eugene naturally used his greatest asset, his intellect. He began to make a serious study of Western philosophy, taking several courses in the philosophy department. One of his instructors was Frederick Sontag, a tough, demanding professor who had become something of a legend around Pomona. At the end of his freshman year, Eugene wrote a paper outlining the philosophical conclusions which he, relying only on his logical mind, his knowledge of science and mathematics, and a little help from the superbrain of Spinoza, had come to. In his paper, quote, God and Man, Their Relationship, Eugene stated, quote, universe is my term for God. It is an improvement over the latter term, I believe, for it far more readily conveys the impersonal, unified concept I wish to present. All science points to the existence of a universe, the totality of things. Nothing in science points to the existence of a God removed from the universe. For the present time, since I have not yet developed my own theory of knowledge, I assume for convenience sake that I can gain knowledge, as certain as can be obtained, through science. Therefore, I believe in the findings of science that point to the existence of the universe. I reject the concept of an independent God for insufficient evidence. These are the words of a teenage Father Seraphim Rose, struggling with profound questions, and I just find this very satisfying and wonderful. Continuing on, this was all that Eugene's empirical reason could attain to. Even Spinoza's brain could not do much better. As for the purpose of life, Eugene wrote, quote, man's only purpose in life is existing, and existing happily. Man should live for his happiness, accepting times when he is not happy merely as passages to higher times. His love of the universe will tide him over to better times, end quote. And when I read these quotes from him, I always read them and hear them in my head in his voice. I don't know if you Google or if you YouTube some of his videos, when his lectures that he's giving, he's got some great ones on Adam and Eve and the fall. He's got great ones on the Orthodox and the end times. Highly recommend checking those out. So continuing on. By this time, as such statements reveal, Eugene had completely rejected the Protestant Christianity of his formative years. He had begun to hate the complacent, prosaic, consumer-oriented middle-class culture in which he had been raised. Its idea of God, he felt, was shallow and provincial, not worthy of one who aspires to the highest reaches of the intellect. Its religion was just an unquestioning acceptance of facile answers by people who were afraid to actually unable to look deeper into the nature of things. To Eugene, Protestantism was represented by the status quo, people living for this world and enjoying earthly happiness while embellishing, justifying, and making more tolerable their everyday existence by resorting to the quote-unquote religious side of their life. Since he inwardly felt different from the status quo, he knew he could never squeeze himself into the parameters of the Protestant American worldview with its ideal of family bliss. He could not accept the accepted answers. He wanted to escape, but for lack of a place to escape to, he was left only to rebel. At the same time, his soul, whether he knew it or not, was seeking something more spiritual than Spinoza's dry intellectualism. Young idealists who are rebelling against Christianity of their childhood, who can accept nothing above the rational and yet are seeking something else to satisfy their spiritual needs, are apt to hear the call of a number of different siren voices. In his searching through Western philosophy, Eugene was drawn to one of the most compelling of these, the wild, prophetic voice of Fredrick Nietzsche. At some point while in college, he read Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra in the original German and was overwhelmed by it. I had a very similar experience encountering Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra and also Beyond Good and Evil in college in an existentialism class. And I remember just calling my parents and trying to talk to them about it. And I didn't read it in the German like he did. He knew several languages. Continuing on, Eugene had several things in common with Nietzsche. Both he and Nietzsche were seekers of noble ideas, involved in an intense and passionate inquiry into ultimate questions. Both of them had been born into the religious atmosphere of Protestantism, which promised to give them everything their souls needed, yet could not. Both were introverted, felt isolated from their fellow man, and underwent inward suffering which others could not comprehend. And both detested standardization, domestication, and the herd mentality, of which they regarded Protestant Christianity to be an example. Many years after leaving college, Eugene was to describe Nietzsche's rebellion against Christianity as follows, quote, "He was a very romantic temperament and was very open to all kinds of higher ideas. In his youth, he was a Protestant seminary student and came to hate Christianity because he saw it in the principle of weakness. This, of course, was true because Luther had taken out of Christianity the idea of ascetic struggle and left it something very weak which does not satisfy either the mind or the heart. Nietzsche could see no one who was struggling, no great ascetics, no heroes of Christianity, and from this he concluded that the whole of Christianity was a monstrous farce, a deception practiced upon humanity which does not satisfy the reason that wants truth, and which is full of superstition. Nietzsche was full of the idea that one can know only what is rational, and therefore he rejected everything above the rational. On the one hand, he saw that Christianity says nothing to the heart because it becomes so watered down that it is feeble. He saw it as simply a way of keeping people quiet and satisfied with their lot, and he said that was for the herds. Quote, Nietzsche himself was filled with the highest natural instincts for nobility and struggle. He was a great student of Greek literature. One of his first books talks about the Dionysian element in Greece. Until his time, people regarded Greece as the home of the classical tradition of Apollo, but he said no, that Greece was also filled with striving, with the romantic feeling which he symbolized by Dionysus. And this was what he wanted to be like Dionysus, constantly striving, struggling for something higher. End quote. Eugene had a desire to share in such a struggle and striving, which, although he did not know it then, was actually a desire for the ascesis denied him by Protestantism. Nietzsche's striving, together with his rejection of Christianity, led him to develop the idea of the Superman. Man, Nietzsche said, is small and weak. He is only temporary. He must be overcome, and the Superman must supersede him. In later years, Eugene was to make the comment that the answer to Nietzsche is St. Anthony the Great, who did overcome mankind, his own human nature, and was like an angel on earth. At this time, however, Eugene had no real exposure to the lofty aspect of Christian asceticism. Nietzsche, Eugene once said, quote, wrote some lovely poems about the dark side of life, deep midnight loneliness, etc., end quote. Here he was speaking of such poems as Night Song, in which Zarathustra gives voice to his feelings. Quote, night has come, now all fountains speak more loudly, and my soul too is a fountain. Something unappeased, unappeasable is within me. It longs to find expression. A craving for love is within me. Alas, ice is all around me. My hand is burned by the ice. Night has come. Alas, that I must be light. And thirst for the nocturnal and loneliness. End quote. During the unhappy period of his early manhood, Eugene must have identified with precisely such dark, terrible, and excruciating longings for the soul. Insanity marked the last 12 years of Nietzsche's life, during the time which he was unable to write anything. Although it was widely believed that this madness came upon him rather suddenly, some astute writers have recognized its gradual development throughout his literary career. Nietzsche's mad ideas were the logical outcome of the proud philosophy of the German idealists and even of Spinoza, which in denying or attenuating the reality of God led eventually to self-worship, absurdity, and nihilism. Nietzsche, the mad prophet, bellowed out, like the pagan dragon of Wagner, poetical fire of the new religion of the Superman, the Antichrist. And however mad this religion might have been, it made more sense to the young Eugene than what he regarded as the spineless Christianity of his age. That is the end of that chapter. Thanks for listening.